Good morning. In a true pivot away from Kehanim and Duchening, we're going to talk about autopsies. So, whatever. Still, we'll move on to the death and dying now. I came across a drasha from Rav Chaim Shmulevitz that he gave by the Siyam Hashas in 1968 in Binyanei Umah, and he said as follows. He said, Chazal say, and this is just a few weeks ago's parish, he says, Chazal say that Kalev went to the Kivrei Avos in Chevron to be Mvakesh Rachamim. He says, I too go to the Kivrei Avos to be Mvakesh Rachamim, and when I go there, he says, there's a handful of requests that I make always when I go there, he says. First I ask, and it's interesting how resonant these things are, a lot of them would still be very applicable today. He says, the first thing I ask is, I tell the Avos, you have to help us out with Yishmael. We can't be Sevelit anymore. It's not working out for us. You have to help us out with that. He says, and then the second request that I ask for is, he says, three things. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should open up the eyes of our brothers in Eretz Yisrael who aren't from. They should stop being roidef us with the Gzeir of Nituchim Mesim. They should stop drafting kids to the army, and they should leave the yeshivas alone. This is his three. This is Rav Chaim Shmulevitz in 1968. He said this by the Siyam Hashas. That these are his three, consistent tefillos when he goes to Kivrei Avos. Now, to me, it struck me the part that I was aiming on is that he includes Nituchim Mesim in that short list of like the major, almost like existential threats to Haredi Yiddishkeit in Eretz Yisrael, in the 60s. Now, it shows us really what level of issue it was. Meaning in the 50s, in the 60s, and even the 70s, the issue of Nituchim Mesim, the issue of autopsies in Eretz Yisrael was like a raging issue. It was going on and on and on, and as much as it was resolved, it was never resolved. There was always like different agreements to resolve it, and they never held, they were never adhered to. It was like a fight that was going on and on. I saw there's a lot of different, I don't know how you want to say it, different zugangs, like outlooks, hadracha, towards protesting. I actually have a sefer at home, a sefer called Sichas B'Halacha, from Chassidish Ingeman, a young guy. He has a whole chapter, like a 30-page maracha on Hafkanot B'Halacha, like the Hafkanot B'Halacha. There's a lot of different, perspectives, I guess, on Hafkanot B'Halacha, on when it's the appropriate time, what's the appropriate way to do it. Now, what's interesting is that the Stipler, and really he's speaking on behalf of the whole Chug Chazanish, like the whole Chazanish way of thinking, was not very into protests. The Chazanish, the Stipler, they were not super big fans of protesting, and the Stipler almost always would advise people to avoid protests, don't go. He was like a believer in the fact that in Eretz Yisrael, we're still in Galus, and you can't protest over here. They're going to take it out on the Charedim if you protest. There's many, many letters from him. I saw like a whole collection of letters from him about this. Many letters where the Stipler was pushing people not to. Ad Kedei Kach, the famous protest about Sheirut Leumi for girls, which we spoke about once upon a time in the past, about drafting women and girls into the army in some context. So the poster that went out said there's going to be a tremendous protest in Tel Aviv on whatever the date was. It was in 1956, I think. Be'shtatvos Marna Chazanish, it said on the paper. Now the Stipler in a letter writes that although the Chazanish was maskim that they could put on the poster Be'shtatvos Chazanish that he's going to go to the protest, in the entire lifetime of the Chazanish, he never went to a public event, and he didn't actually go. He said he was sitting at home learning. He was asking they could put it to encourage everyone else to go, but he didn't go. He says, and the way I know, he says, is because I was sitting and learning from the Mechavrusa, and when it came the appointed time for the buses to go to Tel Aviv to protest, I asked him, should we close the Gemaras and go? He said, no, I'm going to stay. So I said, should I close my Gemara and go? He said, no, you could also stay. So the Stipler brings this as like some sort of, like back channel information, meaning the Chaznish, the Stipler, this world, was not very big protesters. That wasn't their main, their main public form of expressing their displeasure with something. Now, an interesting exception is the Chazanish. If you're vacant with the Chazanish Talmidim, Chazanish had a fascinating Talmud, like a very unique person, a one-off type of person, whose name is Rav Gedalia Nadel. Now, Rav Gedalia Nadel wrote some Svarim. Rav Gedalia Nadel was a Talmud al-Chazanish, the highest caliber Talmud Chacham, Mamash, Kol Terakula type of person, a real Chazanishnik, a Kol Terakula dik from Brachas through Uktzin with Torah, but he had a personal akpada, a very, very strong personal akpada, not to be nene from his learning, and he wanted to be nene migias kapai. And he was, at different points in his life, a gardener, a contractor. He eventually settled on being a winemaker, and Yekev Nadel is like they still make wine today, I think, his family, whatever. He became a winemaker. He died in like 2004, not that long ago. He became a winemaker and made his parnasa from that. He's not a rich man by any stretch of the imagination. He actually was like he was a rebbe of sorts. He had a big influence on, I don't know, this is like obscure history that doesn't matter to anybody. in Bnei Brak, like in the 50s, the Vizhnitz Yeshiva was like the main yeshiva in Bnei Brak, and it had Bachrim from all different crises. Like Yerushalayim would come, and Chazanishnik would send their Bachrim there. It was more of like an all-purpose yeshiva. Vizhnitz wasn't such a big chassidus yet. And a bunch of like future Naturi Kartaniks from Yerushalayim came to Vizhnitz Yeshiva, and they made Rav Gedalia Nadel their Rosh Chabura. And there was like a Merida in the yeshiva. You could look this up. If you're into Vizhnitz history, there was a Merida, and eventually the Rebbe, he wasn't the Rebbe then, he was the Yeshiva then. The Rebbe in Bnei Brak, in the 50s, had to close down the yeshiva, reopen it under a new name, and everybody who wanted to come had to take a new faher. That was the only way to weed out like all the different strands of things. And Gedalia Nadel, I don't know if he was an official stellar or an unofficial stellar. He lost his job there. I think if Nissen Karelitz was saying shir, then he lost his job there. I think there's a third, I forget, a bunch of like famous Bnei Brak, it's an interesting like tidbit in his life of Gedalia Nadel. Now he later on in his life, he had different kinds of Talmidim. He was a very fascinating person. Now, he had 9 children. By the last birth of his child, his 9th child in 1967, his wife had a complication in the middle of the birth, and Nebuch was nifteres, in the middle of the birth. A young woman. He lives till 2004, so do the math. He must have been in his 40s. He was young. He never remarried again. He had 9 Yisayimim in Gedalia Nadel. She was nifteres, and since it was during the 60s, her body was taken, and they did an autopsy on it, Shalei B'Rishos, and it was a tremendous tumult. Gedalia Nadel was a big person, a known person, and that was the exception to the rule. In Bnei Brak at that time, in 1967, there was like at least 5,000 people who gathered to protest the autopsy of Rabbinit, I think Rachel Nadel, her name was, and this was all the Chazanishnikas and all the the real true Bnei Brakers and etc. So this was like the Shiloh, the Sugi of autopsies, was a major flashpoint that really disturbed the whole flow of Haredi Yiddishkeit in Eretz Yisrael for a long time. Now, I want to talk about the Sugi a little bit, the Paiskim that are handling it, the Sugi that's involved in it, and show you where the Makam for Kula is, Kilu, and how they became to be some sort of pasture of Kula B'chlal, and then where the need for all the Chumras is, and etc. So let's start like this. There's a din Meforish, it's a Gemara in Sanhedrin and Daf Memvav and Beis, that says a din Meforish. It goes as follows. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Yochanan Shimon Yechai, Aminayin lemalan es meisei she'over lov miloisas b'loisas. How do you know someone who leaves his dead, meaning he doesn't bury them promptly, is over and loisas? Tamalemer ki covers sik v'renu. Mikan lemalan es meisei she'over b'loisas. Ikad Amri, that's one version. Another version is Amar Rav Yochanan Mishum Shimon Yechai, remez l'kfura min atayr minayin. Where's there a remez for the mitzvah of kfura in the Torah? Tamalemer ki covers sik v'renu. Mikan remez l'kfura min atayr. Here's a remez for kfura min atayr. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin brings down a din. Now the Gemara doesn't say if it's a deraisa to the Rabbanon, it's halacha v'shvisinai. The Gemara brings a remez from different sukkim. So it's zecher a din chashuv, an important din, whether it's a deraisa to the Rabbanon, is a p'shmuz and the Rishayim, etc. But it's a din before the Gemara. Now the Gemara over there brings another shayla, and the Gemara says ibayluhu kfura mishum bizaynahu and mishum kaparuhu. Is kfura because of bizayin hames? Is that why we have to bury the dead, or is kfura because that's a chiluk of the kapara? L'may nafkamina. The Amar lebeina l'lik v'relahu gaver. If a person says, I'm not interested in being buried, siyam b'shum bizayna salav kol kamina. It's not up to you. V'yam b'shum kapara, b'shum kaparahu. Amar lebeina kapara. He's allowed to say, I don't want kapara. So now there's an interesting thing of it. The Gemara is saying another shaila. Is it because of bizayin or is it kapara? And the Gemara says, if it's because of kapara, then you could opt out. You could say, listen, I'm willing to take my chances on Gehenna. I don't want a kapara. Seems like a foolish thing to say, but a person could say it. But if it's mishum bizayna, then a person can opt out. Now, so that's an interesting nakuda, because that means that the bizayin that we're discussing over here is not personal, your bizayin, like someone embarrassed you in public. It's not personal bizayin. It's bizayna klaliistic, bizayna for the mina anushi, bizayna for everybody. It's bizayna when a human body lays out in the ground and it doesn't get buried. That's a bizayin. Now the Gemara leaves this shayla unresolved, but the Gemara later on says something interesting. The Gemara Memzayin Amar Aleph says something interesting. It says Tashma Rav Nasan Aimer Simin Yafa Lameis Shenifra Mimen Alachamisa. Dahainu Meis Shalei Nispad V'lei Nikver Oshachai Ger Rasay Oshachai Gesham Mesalf and Almitay Zel Simin Yafa Lameis. It's a Simin Yafa for the mace if he gets some sort of embarrassment before he's put in the ground. If it's pouring on the aron, or an animal chews on the body, or he doesn't get a hesped properly, or he's not nikver properly, which is a very strange thing the Gemara says. Why? So Rashi explains, because he's getting his payment down here before he goes to Elam Amis. It's a version of, getting the schar or the einish in this world, still hopping around the last minute before the gate closes to have some sort of resolution before he gets to Elam Amis. Now, so the Gemara from this learns out, the Gemara says, Shma mina Yikru the Shechvi Ushmamino. Vaisis, this is Yikru the Shechvi. Now, some Rishonim extract from this Gemara that Vaisis, the Gemara means to show with this little anecdote over here that the idea of Kfura is all about Bezayin. Because it says Yikru the Shechvi, it's about the covet for the Shechvi, the covet of the dead. So you see if the Gemara is extrapolating from this that it's about the covet for the dead, Vaisis, that the Gemara meant to resolve the Shiloh from earlier on, and therefore one cannot opt out of Kfura. And as I always get past in the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam, in Hilchas Evel, in the 12th Parak, and the Shulchan Aruch, and the Hilchas Avelis, Paskins, that a person is not allowed to opt out of Kfura. If a person writes in his Seva, I don't want to be buried, we ignore it, we bury him anyhow. That's the halacha, because Kfura is a chiyuv. Now, in this Gemara also was included the din of halanas ames, which is another form of bezayin. That comes from a pasuk. The pasuk in Parashat Kiseitze says, even after someone who got oinshe bezdin, and you hang him on a tree, kala nisrafim nitlin, right? That's a din in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Afal pikin leisalin alaitz, you can't leave him overnight on the tree. Ki kilas alekimhu. It's a bezayin for Hashem to have a body of a human hanging on a tree overnight, which Rashi explains. Every person is a tzelem alekim. So it's as if you have one very successful brother and one brother is a near do well, and the criminal brother gets sentenced to death, and he's hung in the market square, and everybody passes by and says, "Oh look, the Gvir, the head of the town, was hung. It doesn't look good, so maybe we don't leave him there forever." As I state, that's Rashi, and the Ramban over there has his own mahalach, famous thing. As I state, we don't. So there's an isser of halanas hames, there's a mitzvah skfura, there's an isser of bizayin hames. These are, now, whether all these are the Raisis, the Rabbanons, each one of them is a bit of a shmooze, but they exist. These are things that are clear, either in Psukim or Chazals or the Midrashim. These are very clear things. Now, additionally, there's another aspect that can be discussed over here. And this one is another shayla. Leave this one for a second. Now, so this is the tzaddim that would sound like burying someone is super important, and anything that delays burial, that prevents the body from being buried in a proper manner, would definitely be asur. Now, there is a Gemara in Baba Basra that opens the door for something. The Gemara Mabasra says as follows, and this is just interesting to me, it's ironic that it's Maaseh b'Bnei Brak. That's how the Gemara starts. Maaseh b'Bnei Brak. There was a story in Bnei Brak, which Rashi, not Rashi, the Rashbam over here says, Maaseh b'Bnei Brak, Rashi says, Makim. It's a place. Because in Rashi's time, in the Rashbam's time, Bnei Brak was not, on the tip of everybody's tongue. So it was some obscure ancient city. So the Rashbam says Makim, it's a place. But today this Gemara reads, this everyone will know what this is. Ma'aseh b'Bnei Brak, the Gemara says, there was a Chesed Mishpat child that happened about a dead, almost adult child. Could we dig up his body and check to see, is this child a katan, is he a gadol, see what the status is. You're not allowed to be menavel the body. That's Rabbi Akiva. Now the Gemara continues on Daf Kufnun Hey. Kufnun Daled and Beis, and the Gemara says that if this person has some sort of unresolved financial issue with someone else, an unresolved financial dispute, a real chayshim mishpatik shayla, then l'navel v'l'navel, the Gemara says. You could dig him up, let him be let the body get nivel, because he has an unresolved issue that needs to be resolved. Taisvish says, "Aval yarshim einer rashay l'navloi b'shvil yerusha, d'loi midiyav v'oichu krevim." Taisvish says, but yarshim who have a yarshim question, that's why they want to dig him up. They're not allowed to, because first of all, it's a kumt, they're garnished. If it's available, it's available. The Yerusha, if it's not available, it's not available. You don't have a taina on the Meirish. You should have given me the money. Either you'll get it or you don't get it. How could a Karav do that to his Karav? You're going to dig up and destroy the body of your Karav? It's not passing. And the Achrayim Shtalzach on what's the difference of these two terutzim and Taisvis, and leave that aside for now. But Al Kapanim, what you have over here is the beginning of like a framework of the Chaymer Hadvarim of why it's usher to not bury someone and to do an autopsy and to not bury, to destroy the body after a person's death. And mitzad sheni, you start seeing the first crack in the wall from the fact that the Gemara seems to say that if there's a financial dispute, an open tab, a chesed mishpat tab that's left open, there's potential to allow this person's body to be disinterred and examined, which is zicher b'zayin hames. So you see both sides of the coin of it. You see the chaymer advarim, that it shouldn't be allowed in a general sense, and you also see the beginning of the cracks, that there is makim to sometimes allow nivel hames for some sort of tzerich. Now, one other bit of preliminary information before we go into the actual Mechilkas HaPoskim is there's a famous Shuvas Rashba. The Rashba is a shayla as follows. It's Ruvain Tziva B'Shas Petirasai Sheyisu Eisa Likvar Oisav B'Mkeim Avoisav. Ruvain dies and he was mitzaveh. He'd like to get buried in his family, homestead, wherever that is. It's far away. Now we're talking about in the Rashba's times, in the 1300s or whatever it is, and to take a body, 500, 1,000 miles is going to take maybe weeks on the back of a wagon. Now, everybody knows if you put a body on the back of a wagon for weeks, it's not going to end well. So the shaila is that presented to the Rashba, could they start embalming the body, which means they're gonna, the way they did it and the way the Rashba describes it in all its gory details, is they would cut open the body, remove the intestines and internal organs, fill the body with embalming liquid, whatever that would be. I don't know what the formaldehyde of 1350 was, and that would preserve the body. And then they would coat the outside of the body with some lime that would start the body's decomposition already. So the body would A, start decomposing, and B, be preserved with this internal something in the inside. So clearly it would appear to be some sort of bizayin for the mace to allow this to happen. So says the Rashba as follows. He says, Tshuva. Kol ki hai sha'oisin la'akal b'sari meheira kedei lisa oisin l'makom shetziva mutter. Anything that you're doing that's going to cause the flesh to decompose quicker, to bring him to where he wants to go, is mutter. She'en kam mishum bizayin, ve'en kam mishum tsar. The body can't feel anything. It doesn't know what you're doing to it. And there's no bizayin to bring the body to the place where he wants to go. And this, he says, this that the embalmers cut open the stomach and take out the intestines. It's fine, he says. Is mutter. So the Rashba seems to say that even though there's some sort of real evil or disgusting thing that's being visited upon this corpse, the dead person wants it, and he wants to be buried where he wants to go. This we don't look at as a bizayin at all, and we're allowed to take him. Now, the poskim are going to take out different things from this Shuvas Rashba. Everyone takes out from the Shuvas Rashba different things, but this is the preliminary information to have the conversation. These are the Gemaras and the basic psakim and rishonim that you need to know to have the conversation. Now, what's interesting about this is it sounds like a modern shaila, right? Autopsies is something that went on in Israel in the 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever, Sounds like a modern shaila till it was resolved by the Knesset with the different agreements that were made and whatever. But Lamaisa, it's a relatively old shaila. The first one to discuss it is the Sheilas Yavitz, or Yaakov Emden, in like 1730 something, like a long time ago. The Sheilas Yavitz has a shaila about it. He starts off handling about using dogs, the body of a dog, to dissect the dog's body so that he can learn medicine from it, and eventually he morphs into humans. It's a long tshuva, we're not going to go into it. But the real first tshuva that discusses it, by Arichas in detail, is Ned Yehuda in Yeridei Madura Tinyana and Tshuva Reish Yod. Ned Yehuda has an interesting thing. He says, Al-Dvar kontrasai asher shalach elai. Ned Yehuda received the kontras asher herach maracha London. Basically, there was a dispute in London among several rabbanim. London had a medical school, and in the medical school there were some Jewish students, and the procedure in the medical school was they would give bodies to do autopsies on and to learn anatomy and to learn structures of the body and how to deal with it and how to treat it. And the rabbanim in London had a big tumult amongst themselves, arguing, is it mutter or is it asa to do this? Meaning, could a Jewish student get a body and do an autopsy like this, or is it not allowed? He says, I'll read you. He says, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I back it up. I confused the Yavitz's shaila with the Ned Yehuda's shaila. That's the Yavitz's question. The Ned Yehuda's question is different. It's as follows. Some sort of like gallstones or something, a stone in his pocket, whatever that means. Some sort of stone in an internal organ that wasn't resolved. Because the Roifim tried to do a surgery to dislodge it and to allow him to live. Well, they also lay trufa, umeis. But whatever they were doing, it wasn't enough, and this person dies. The Chachmei Eir, the shaila as follows: Imuter lachtech beguf hameis b'makom hazeh kedei liris b'moifes sherish hamaka azos. Could we continue fishing around now in the wound, do more, deconstruct his whole intestines, and figure out exactly what went wrong over here? See how this stone got in there. Kedei le'islamid mizeh b'hanhagas haref mikana labas. So we could learn from here for the future how to treat such a thing. Mikra kazeh. The next time we'll know how to do the surgery better. If we can continue fishing around, the very next time we'll know how to do the surgery better. Is there an isra mishum nivel ames to do this or not? This is the Ned Yehuda shaila. And the Rabbanim in London disputed this amongst themselves back and forth. And the shaila over here, I don't know who it is, Rebleib Fishelis, sent a contrast to the Ned Yehuda with the tzara Isrim, the tzara Matirim, the Rayas Lakan, and his input, and he asked the Ned Yehuda to review the whole thing and give him the outcome. Now, the tzadim so it's interesting. So they go back and forth, all the different ones, and they carve up. I'm not going to get into the technical thing, but they carve up these gemaras that we discussed. The Gemara Basra, each one tries to bring. All the rabbanim we're writing over here are very aware of all the same rayas. So everybody's trying to use it to their benefit and extract different nekudas lakan to bring rayas. Now, what's interesting is that the Ned Yehuda ends up coming out and saying that ledaitoi, to do an autopsy for no reason, just stam to do an autopsy, is aser, zicher, meaning to use it to learn anatomy is zicher aser. To use it because somebody died, you want to know why they died, like a cause of death, also aser. But the Neit Yehuda says that l'tzarech pikuach nefesh is mutter. Now, that shouldn't be a major chiddush. The Neit Yehuda actually says that's not a major chiddush. He says, big deal, of course, anything that's l'tzarech pikuach nefesh is mutter. Like Kol Terakula, we know that. Only 3 surim are not teicha pikuach nefesh, right? Everything else, pikuach nefesh is mutter. It's not a big deal. The Yehuda says if it's going to be pikuach nefesh, if you're going to save lives because of the autopsy, it should be mutter. Now here's where the Neit Yehuda opens up what's called the gray area. It says the Neit Yehuda as follows. He says, Onnam, Kol Zeh, he says, is b'yesh suffix sakanas nefashis lefanenu. There's a suffix sakanas nefashis in front of us right now. Meaning you have patient A who died with this certain ailment that we don't know exactly what went wrong. And in the next bed over is patient B, who's sick with the same thing. And possibly the information we could extract from patient A's autopsy could lead to patient B's survival. He says that's considered sakanas nefashis lefanenu. Ki goin chayla in a filas gal, v'chein mitzach v'schulin, fine, v'chein afil linyan mammon. He says, there's no current sick person who's waiting for the information from this autopsy. We want to learn the bank, the chachma that we have available from this corpse, so that in the future we'll know more. We're not because of that. Any yisakal or yisachamer. Why? Now this is a very interesting, important punchline. He says, if you're going to call this a suffix nefashis, and this is a big yisaid in the pikuach nefesh, if you're going to call this just getting the information suffix nefashis, imkein yeh kol malachas refuas shchikis ubishel samamanim v'achanas kli iz malach kaza mutar b'Shabbos. Everything ever related to medicine for Tuesday, for next month, for next Wednesday should be mutar on Shabbos, because everything could lead to if I don't have my knife sharpened now, I might not have it later. It's the inlet of a seif. You can make pikuach nefesh into a watershed heter for everything, he says. Maybe someone's going to show up who needs it. And he says you can't do that. Even goyim don't do that. If this is going to be your rationale, then every single body that ends up in a hospital will have an autopsy. There's no view. Now, what's interesting is that the modern doctors in 50s and 60s in Eretz Yisrael must have read this tshuva and thought that they were supposed to do this. Because this was the matzav in Eretz Yisrael then. Anybody who was unclaimed for 5 minutes was autopsied on. Mamash, like the Neit Yehuda says. Meaning if you allow the Pikuach Nefesh Svara to run amok, to become Mamash, this Klalisik Svara that has no limitations, then you end up like this. So Neit Yehuda over here, he sets the table. He's the first tshuva, he sets the table. He says it's also to do it, generally speaking. But the tzarech pikuach nefesh is mutter. But what constitutes pikuach nefesh is not so simple. It's only particular cases. Now the Chasam Sofer in a tshuva following up to Neit Yehuda, he mostly agrees with the Neit Yehuda. Side with the isser, side with the heter. He's just moisef one nakuda that's like a wrench that throws in a wrench. The Chasam Sofer says there's another isser on the table that's not being discussed. Leave aside nivel ames and chiv kura and all that. The Chasam Sofer says there's also an isser of hanam and ames. A mace is asar b'hana. You're not allowed to be nana from a mace b'chal. He says to take a mace's body and do an autopsy and learn things from it and get information from it is nenem and a mace. If you're being nenem and a mace, that's also an isser farzich. So Chasam Sofer adds that in, that there's an isser of nenem and a mace, and that's like a complicating factor sometimes. Now, there's even shittas that are much more machmir than this. There's a binyan tzion from the Aruch LaNer. But the binyan tzion says something fascinating. He says there's a Rashi in Baba Kama. It's an interesting sugya. The Gemara in Baba Kama Daf Samach handles about destroying somebody else's property in order to save your own life. Now there's a machlekes Rishonim how to learn the Gemara over there. But Rashi seems to say that anytime you destroy Yena's property, it's usher to destroy Yena's property unless you're going to pay him back. That's what Rashi says. Taisva says, Kipshutai, the Gemara is just saying that you're mechuyev to pay back. It's not a p'tor. Pikuach nefesh is not a p'tor. If you destroy someone's property because of pikuach nefesh is not a p'tor, you have to pay back. Rashi's saying it's even more. Rashi says the Gemara is saying it's usher to destroy somebody's property if you're not going to pay back. Now, Hanaf Kaminim from this machlekes Rishonim says the binyan tzion is that by a dead person, where you're going to destroy his body, which he says is even more important than his property, you're not just destroying his property, you're destroying his body. His body that you're destroying is more consequential and impossible to pay him back because he's dead. How do you pay back a guy who's dead? You destroyed his body, you can't pay him back. So says the binyan tzion, the Neit Yehuda said pikuach nefesh is deicha everything. He says, yeah, pikuach nefesh is not deicha stealing somebody else's stuff, and damaging his body is even worse than stealing from him, and you can never pay him back. So according to Rashi, it's aser. So the binyan tzion is the most extreme chumradik position. He doesn't even allow tzarech pikuach nefesh. which is a wild chumrah, and some of the Chasam Sofer Talmidim, Machne Chaim, and in particular the Maram Shik and two Chuvas, take the Bin Yitzin to task, and they argue a lot of rayas, the Lakan, from Gemara in Erechin, Gemara in Chulin, and it's Arichas like a pilpul. The Bin Yitzin, when he first published the Tshuva, before it was in Bin Yitzin, it was in his his alon that went out monthly in all over Europe, and it was called Shem Etzion and Eman. He sent it around, and the Maram Shik in his Tshuva is responding to something like he read, like on the table on Shabbos. He says like Re'isi in the alon that you said X, Y, and Z, and the Lamaisa it's Shver from here, and it's also the Maram Shik. A lot of the Maram Shik's Tshuvas, if you're familiar with the Maram Shik, are in defense of the Chasam Sofer's positions. And here the Chasam Sofer took a strong position over here. The Maram Shik, strongly goes out to argue this Bin Yitzin, but this is the Bin Yitzin that's Machmer. Now, it's rather just stam a line in the end of the Tshuva of the Chasam Sofer that I want to read, just because it's a great line. The Chasam Sofer says like this. He says, Ach b'nei Yisrael ma'aminim, gam adam ki yamas ba'oil, adayin b'moisei nikra adam pnimi. Klal Yisrael ma'aminim believe that even a person after he dies, he's still called an adam pnimi, v'lei peger, which he translates in Yiddish to, I don't know, I think it's corpse in Yiddish, I'm not exactly, yeah. Ki gam b'gufay she'nirtak l'neshama, nisha b'lachluchas kedusha. The guf that was connected, that was a shell for the neshama, some kedusha, it maintains some kedusha. V'noyegim b'kavod. V'imrul of killas alikim tali al devar aderech haramban al kain aser b'hanafa. And this is the Chasam Sofer beautifully describes how Jews look at bodies. In any case, so we have over here like a Neidah B'Yehuda, Chasam Sofer, Machne Chaim, Maram Shik, many different poskim who are being makel and saying that autopsies are yes allowed in certain circumstances, meaning for pikuach nefesh or something like that. And then you have the machmirim, like the Bin Yitzin and maybe others who are much more machmir about it and say it's never allowed under any circumstances. Now, what's interesting is that this gray area of pikuach nefesh in the Neidah B'Yehuda, in the light of modern medicine, becomes a greater shayla, because the Neidah B'Yehuda says you have to have a current and pressing need for this information. Now, some poskim wanted to say that bisman hazeh, that medicine, zikr bisman hazeh mamish, that everything's interconnected and information travels from one end of the globe to the other end of the globe in an instant. If you have the war on cancer, I don't know, let's say, right, and doctors all over the world are trying to figure out how to cure a certain cancer, and a doctor in Tel Aviv has a body who dies, a person who dies from this type of thing, and he has a body there, it's yitachan that the information he could extract could go to Sloan, in 5 minutes. He can WhatsApp his friend in Sloan and say, here, I just found X, Y, and Z. So now, of course, that's a very crass oversimplification of the medical system, and that's not actually how it works. But I'm just trying to say it in an extreme way. So Mamela, some poskim, like the Sri Deyesh and Rav Herzog and maybe the Tzitz Eliezer held that Bisman Hazeh, the Neidah B'Yehuda's threshold of what's considered a current and pressing danger of pikuach nefesh that would justify an autopsy, that would allow it, is substantially lowered. Meaning what you would need for the Neidah B'Yehuda's time, you would need literally a patient in the next bed over. Bisman Hazeh, a patient in the same hospital system should be enough, or something that's a universal issue should be enough, right away. And some poskim, like the Sri Deyesh is the one who says it, Mamash at the back Tzener, say that L'chayri should be able to allow autopsies for any illness that's like a common and prevalent illness that isn't solved. Meaning an illness that's not solved, that's common and prevalent, you should be able to allow autopsies. Now, Lamaisa, Rav Moshe and the Har Tzvi and Rav Avadia strongly dispute this point and don't allow it and whatever. But there is an interesting thing, the Chazon Ish, of all people, in Alis and Simon Chaf Beis, he says very interesting words that leaves the Chazon Ish's position itself like in dispute, like on which side of this shayla the Chazon Ish hold. And I'll read a few. Chazon Ish brings, he says, the Neidah B'Yehuda Chasam Sofer, dem yesh chayla kamon mutal l'navle mishum pikuach nefesh. If there's a chayla in front of us, you could be menavle mishum pikuach nefesh. Aval ein chayla kamon aser. If there's not a chayla here, then it's aser. Now, he says, aval matzei hadavar, the Chazon Ish says, these are the important words. In matzei hadavar, the bizman shem asriyan alav mishum chayli mahalechas havalei ka'ovim shetzaru be'ir asamuch l'saper u'kedamer be'ervin u'b'tainis u'mi b'shashalom l'chashvinon. So the Chazon Ish brings this whole collection of Gemaras, a Gemara in Tainis, a Gemara in Erevin, which are watershed Gemaras in describing how present danger has to be in order for it to be called danger. And the Chazon Ish is saying that if there's a chayla b'fanenu, matzei hadavar, whatever that means, matzei hadavar, it's very common that this chayla is around, is around, then there's makom to be mekel. But b'dvarim asidim, things that are in the future, ein lanu kol zecher, then you can't be mekel at all. So the Chazon Ish opens up the door over here to say that any very prevalent or common or disease that the doctors are working on right then has more makom to be mekel on it. And the Nishmas Avram, Professor Abraham brings that Rosh Zalman told him, I want to read it so I get it right, because Rosh Zalman told him as follows, Kavanas HaChazon Ish hu, she'afilu ein ha'chaylu lefanenu, even if the actual ill person is not in front of us mamish, achem ha'machlo nefutza kach, The machla is so nafutz, it's such a common machla, that the zikr is another live chayla somewhere else. And you'll be able to help him with this current information right now, then it's allowed. So the Chazon Ish, of all people, is more makel on this regard, is opening up the door to stretching this Neid of Yehuda, similar in the direction of this radiation, etc. Now, Stam, 2 tidbits, and I'll end with this. If you want to see a very nice overview of the whole sugya, I tried my best, but a better one, it's Eliezer Chelik Dalet in Siman Yudalet does a very nice overview of all the chuvas, all the paiskim, all the gemara, so everything. Second thing is Stam, a fascinating zaitige human interest thing together with the shaila is Rav Moshe in Yeridei Beis has such a crazy shaila over here, such a crazy tshuva. It's a little tiny tshuva, he says. It's a shaila that he's getting in 1967 while this is raging, and he says, Hashailas hamuzaris ma'od. These very strange questions that you're asking me about limbs of dead people and whatever because of the autopsy thing. And then the end over there, he has a shaila as follows. They asked him if they could go into hospitals and steal organs and limbs of autopsied bodies, meaning take a heart, because most people never saw a heart in real life, and it's very disgusting and gory, and bring it to a protest against autopsies, and hold it up there on the podium, go by the podium and hold up a leg and a heart, and say, this is what they're doing to the dead. Are you allowed to do that? Is that halachically permitted to do that? Now, it's such a bizarre shaila, but it's Inigris Moshe Yerdei Chelik Beis. It's a real question. Moshe himself calls it a bizarre shaila. He says the shaila muzaris. It's a very strange question. Moshe handles that chayra would be mutter. It's not bezayin ames, he says, because it's l'tzarech hames. It's to protect, from evil ames in the future and whatever. He handles it. He doesn't come out with a clear outcome. It's just a very, very bizarre question. I don't think you'll ever come across such a question again. I just wanted to make sure we get that in there. All right, to be continued.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.